This conference will now be recorded.
In previous session, we were discussing about Terraform configurations, and we have implemented a Terraform code, Terraform configurations for creating a VPC and its components. So, as I already discussed in the last session, a Terraform can be used for creating any type of resources using the providers, Terraform providers called plugins, and using those providers you can create a resources in that provider by passing the arguments to those resource types, resource blocks. I have given that as an assignment. I have given that as an assignment. Few people has done that assignment. Again, that count is very less. Only less people. Hardly I see 4, 5 students has done that assignment. What about others? Are you guys able to complete that assignment, whatever has been given, or are you guys still doing? Are you yet to do? Without doing the assignments, without creating a Terraform configurations, without doing the assignment, you don't understand how Terraform works. So what do you mean by Terraform block? What do you mean by provider block? What do you mean by resource block? How resource works? What is the behavior of the resource? What is arguments? What is meta arguments? You don't understand all these things unless until you start practicing the concepts. So in last session, we created a VPC, and I asked you to create a VPC. If you guys are able to complete that assignment, well and good. Otherwise, if you are not able to complete that assignment, at least try to spend some time and complete that assignment. Okay, I hope everything clear. Now let's understand some other concepts in Terraform. The most important one, variables in Terraform. Like any other typical programmatic language or any scripting language, you have a concept of variables, right? You take any programmatic language or any scripting language, there is a concept of variables, right? Variable. So Terraform also supports variables. There are different types of variables. Terraform language includes few kinds of blocks for requesting or publishing the values. We have different types of variables like input variables, output variables, or input variables, output variables, or output values. We say output values, local values like this. We have some types of variables, right? So like any typical programmatic language, variables is a great way to define centrally controlled reusable values. Variables is a great way to define the centrally controlled reusable values. So the variables whatever we have defined in Terraform is saved independently from the your configurations, which makes the values easy to read and edit from the single file. So you can define your Terraform configurations in a separate file. If required, you can define your variables in a separate file. And in your Terraform configurations, you can refer the Terraform variables, that values. And it is easy for us to pass or edit the variables at runtime also, at whatever time you are trying to pass, right? So And we have different types of variables, as I already told. There are different types of variables, as I already told: input variables, output variables, and local variables or local values. Input variables, output variables, and local values. Variables are fundamental in fundamental basics or fundamentals in any programmatic language. They are going to be useful in building the dynamic behavior. We use variables to store temporary values. We use variables to store some kind of a temporary value so that we can assist programmatic language as well as any complex scenarios also. So let's understand what do you mean by input variable, what do you mean by output values or local values, like that. So input variables serves as a parameters for Terraform modules or Terraform configurations. So users can customize the behavior of our Terraform configurations without editing the source code, without modifying the source. Users, the developers of Terraform, can customize the behavior of the Terraform configurations without editing the configurations by using input variables. So input variables are usually defined by name, a type, and a default value. Input variables are usually defined by a state, that I mean to say name, the variable name, the type of the variable, and the default value. These variables can be used in your Terraform configurations as an input. As an input, we can use these variables in a Terraform configurations. In the Terraform configurations, you can use these input variables. You can define the variable and you can use this variable. So Terraform input variables. These input variables are used as parameters to provide values at runtime. At runtime, in the sense, whenever we are deploying at runtime, to customize our deployments in Terraform. Input Terraform variables can be defined in any file, like in the main.tf file or any other file also, but it's a best practice to maintain that input variables in a separate file called like a variable.tf file. That input variables can be maintained in any type of Terraform file, but it's a best practice to maintain that input variables in a separate file, variables file, so that it is easy to manage those variables by editing only that variable file instead of editing the configurations, your Terraform configurations. So these input variables are taken as an, you can refer these input variables in our Terraform configurations, and you can pass those values at runtime also. We can use these input variables. We can use these input variables. We can use these input variables to pass certain values from outside of the configuration, Terraform configuration or module. Just to give an example, just to give an example, here we are creating some AWS resource. Let me take very simple example. Let me take very simple example. Let me create one new folder. Let me create one new folder. Let me create one new folder to understand variables demo 1. Just I'm creating one folder. Now let me create some resources. So as best practice, you can maintain Terraform configurations in a separate file, like the version, required version, that required providers. We already discussed all these things. Let's say required version, I can say 1.3.0, anything greater than this, like this. And required providers, I'll use AWS provider. As I already told, we are going to use AWS provider throughout the session. I'm going to use this AWS provider. And a provider block, AWS profile. I'm going to use that whatever I have created. Let me try to. Now I'm trying to create some resource. I'm trying to create some resource in that AWS. Let's say I'm creating a resource AWS. Let's say instance, like demo EC2, like that. Now here we are giving some information like AMI, and we are giving instance type like this. Instance type. Let's say instead of, I can hard code like this, and I can say sometimes availability zone. Under which availability zone? Let's say AP South 1A AMI. Sometimes I want to create some instances using Red Hat AMI. Sometimes I want to create instances using different AMI. Let's say I'm giving that AMI ID, something like this. Now using this, I am able to create a resource. Using this information, I am able to create a resource. Using this information, I am able to create a resource. But sometimes I want to create AMI EC2 instance using different AMI. Sometimes I want to create a EC2 instance of different type in different availability zone. Let's say this will work, but I need to duplicate this code, or I need to update this code, right? Because I am hard coding this value. Let me create a resource. It will work definitely. It will work. It will work. Let me go to this. So I will initialize. I will initialize the Terraform. It is going to download required backends, that providers. Then if I try to create a Terraform resource, it will work. Let's wait for some time. So for the first time, I am running Terraform initialization. It is downloading that provider in this module. This is considered as a root module. Any Terraform, wherever you have a Terraform file, that can be even a single .tf file. In that folder, if you are running Terraform commands, that becomes a root module. We already discussed. So we are initializing that root module by downloading the required providers. Let's wait for some time. Now let's say Terraform plan. It will try to create, it will show the execution plan by comparing the desired state with current state. By comparing the desired state with current state, it will create an execution plan. It is going to create one resource. It is going to create one resource as per the details. This will be created using this AMI ID with this instance type and in this availability zone. In this availability zone, where is that availability zone? In 1A. Now, if I try to create, it will create. There is no problem. Terraform apply, -- auto approve. It will work. Now it is going to create. But sometimes I may want to create a different instance type. I want to use different AMI. I don't want to hard code. This is where you can use variables. This is where you can use variables like any programmatic language. Whether you are using Java, .NET, Python, or any scripting language like Shell script, Groovy script, or any configurations you are using like Ansible configurations, or if you guys are using Helm, there is a concept of variables, right? Using these variables, right, you can write a code in such a way that you can reuse those configurations by passing different values. Let's say sometimes I want to create a different resource of different type. Do I need to modify if I hard code the values here? If I hard code this code, if I hard code this value here, do I need to modify the code? Definitely, yes. And can I reuse this code? Can I reuse this code? There is a concept called do not repeat yourself. Do not repeat yourself. Don't duplicate the code. Don't duplicate the code. I want to reuse this code. Is it possible? If I hard code, if we hard code, can we reuse this code? No. So that is where you can use a variables concept. That is where we can use a variables concept. And when it comes to variables, there is input variables, there is a output variables, and there is something called local values. There is a input variables, there is output variables, there is a local values. These local values and input values, there are slight differences. There are slight differences. There is a difference between input values and local values. Local values are like a temporary values, and those values that values will work only within that module. You can access those local variables or local values only in that configuration wherever you have defined. Wherever you have defined, only in that configuration you can use. You can't use in a different configurations or different, I mean to say you can't use module. You can't access modules out in a different module like that. Local values are accessible within that module. That can be a root module. We call it, right, root modular configuration. These local variables cannot be accessed in another modules. If you have a child modules, you can't refer like that. You can't refer like that. So local values or local variables are like a temporary variables. Local variables are declared. You can declare the variables. You can declare the variables like these local values, right? These are like a temporary values. These are like a temporary values, and these can be accessed. These can be accessed only within that module. Only within that module. You can't access from a different module in the Terraform. You can't access from the different module in the Terraform. You can access only in that only module, in that configuration only. You can't access from a different module. This is like a temporary variables. So you can define using local block. You can define these local values using local block. You can define these local values using local block. Local values can be defined using a local block, something like this. Locals, local, something like this. Let me show that. You can define something like this. Locals, locals, key and value, key and value, key and value. You can use local values. Local value assigns a name to an expression or value, something like this. Using this locals block, I can define a variable, kind of a variable, key value, right? Let's say I can say something like this: instance, instance type, instance type. Let's say I can say instance, whatever. This is key and its value. Let's say I can say instance type as t2 dot micro, or I can say tags. I can say tags, tags. I can define tags also here, like a key value pair. You can say tags also like this. Whatever common tags you have, right? Let's say name or something like this. Environment equals to dev name demo, like that. You can use local variables or local values to define the value, like a temporary values. These you can use in, you can refer these local variables multiple times. You can refer these local variables multiple times instead of hard coding. So a local value assigns a name to an expression. So you can use the name multiple times within a module instead of repeating multiple times, instead of duplicating multiple times. So if you are familiar with programmatic language, if you guys are familiar with any traditional programmatic language, it can be useful, it can be useful to pass some kind of a value, some kind of a value. So it's like a, you can refer that variable, that value, that variable multiple times in that configurations. So these local values are like a function temporary variables, like a, it is like a temporary variables for that function, temporary variables for that function. Like if you are familiar with programmatic language, you have a local variables, local values, right? Those local variables or local values can access only within that function or method, like that. Similarly, these local values or local variables we can access only within that configuration, within that module. Local values can be helpful, local values will be helpful to avoid repeating the same value or expressions multiple times in a same configuration. These local values are helpful when instead of repeating the same values or expression multiple times in a configuration, you can define this as a local variables and you can refer these multiple times, multiple times. Suppose these tags is common for multiple resources. Let's say I'm trying to create multiple resources. Just to give an example, I'm creating multiple AWS resources that can be another AWS resource like S3 bucket. I'm creating S3 bucket. I'm trying to again using something like this for that S3 bucket also. I'm trying to again use something like this, but I don't want to repeat this multiple time. I don't want to repeat this multiple time. I'm trying to create a S3 bucket and I'm trying to repeat this one like this. And I'm trying to create a EC2 instance also. For this also, I'm trying to use same tags like this, right? And suppose your availability zone, you are referring this availability zone multiple times. You are referring this availability zone multiple times. Sometimes you are creating, just to give an example, local variables is different purpose. It is like a temporary variables, and instead of repeating or instead of using those duplicating those values multiple time, you can define as a local variables. Let's say I'm trying to create a one more instance in 1B availability zone. 1B availability zone, I'm trying to create one more instance. In 1A, I'm creating one instance. In 1B, I'm creating one more instance, right? Instead of hard coding or instead of duplicating like this, what I can do, I can define these as a local variables. I can define these as a local variables like this, and I can refer these local variables like a temporary variables. These variables can be accessed only within this module. You can't access in another module. Something like this. Instead of hard coding, I can say local data instance type here, and here also I can say local data instance type. You can say this can be anything. You can say something like this, instance type micro. This is one name, right? You can use something like this also, instance type micro like this, instead of duplicating in multiple times. Now availability zone, right? Now instead of duplicating like this multiple times, you can define a variable, availability zone, some kind of a variable, availability zone 1A. Now you can refer something like this, availability zone 1A. Now you can create a one more like this, instance type medium T2 dot something medium, right? Instance type medium, availability zone 1B, some kind of a temporary variables. And these you can refer in multiple locations wherever you want to refer this. In multiple locations you can refer something like this, availability zone 1A, instance type micro. Like instead of hardcore, instead of defining like this, I can say local data tags, local data tags like that, local data tags. You can refer local data tags, whatever I have defined here in the locals block, like this. Now for this one also, for S3 bucket also, what I can say, something like this, local dot tags like this. And here also I can say local dot tags, like instead of repeating multiple times, you define here and you can access here. in that block, in that configuration. Now suppose here different instance type. Suppose I want to create an instance type of t2.micro only. In this availability zone also I can say something like this. And availability zone, I can say something like this, local dot availability zone 1b, like this. Based on duplicating or referring using the same values multiple times, you can define as a local value, like a temporary values. You can access these values only within that module. Now, if you see, everything is here. The variables are values, local values. There is a difference between input values and local values. Now I am discussing about local values. I'll come to this input values later. First, let's understand the local values. I'll come to this input values later. So local values, as I already told, local values can be helpful to avoid repeating the same values multiple times in a configuration. These local values will be helpful to avoid repeating the same values multiple times in a configuration. This is helpful only when you want to avoid repeating the same value multiple times in the configuration. You can go with local values. So local values is having a name. The local values can be defined. The local values can be defined using name and a value. Name and a value. It is like a temporary variables. The local values are like a temporary variables. A local value is like a temporary variables. Local values are like a temporary variables. A local value assigns a name to an expression. So you can use the name multiple times within that module instead of repeating. We already discussed, right? A local value assigns name to an expression or value, we call it. An expression or value. You can use the name. You can use the name. That local variable name or local value name. You can use that name multiple times within that module. Even though you have a single Terraform file, that also becomes a module. We discussed that is like a root module. Within that module, you can use that within that module instead of repeating that value or expression multiple times. Instead of repeating that value or expression multiple times, you can use that name. This is helpful in some scenario, not like reusing, not for reusing. This is helpful only in some scenario. In which scenario? Instead of hard coding that value multiple times, you can define as a local variable, like a temporary variable, and you can refer that variable multiple times. We can use this many times instead of repeating that multiple times. So you can assign a value. This is like a key value pair again. You can assign any key, I mean to say the variable name can be anything. The value can be simple value or complex value also. So these local values can be used to avoid. This is helpful This is helpful, as I already told. This is going to be helpful, as I already told, to avoid repeating same values or expressions, we call it. Same values or expressions multiple times in your configuration. In a configuration. In a configuration. Just to give an example, something like this. This is just a name and value. If required, you can give, this is like I have given tags, right? You can give ABC also. You can give ABC, or you can give XYZ also. This is just a variable name. I have given, right, my own name here. Instance type micro, availability zone 1A, availability zone 1B. This is just a name, kind of a variable name, local variable name. Now you can give whatever. Let's say you want to give more specific, you can say EC2 tags, EC2 tags. Suppose you want to have something like S3 tags, something like this, anything. These are like your own name and its value. Understood? This is your own variable name and its value. Now I don't want to repeat this multiple times. Suppose I am saying AP South 1A here, and again I am saying AP South 1A here. Just to give an example, AP South 1A, I don't want to repeat. And I don't want to every time have something like this. Just to give an example, I don't want to have multiple times something like this. Here, I don't want to have multiple times like this. This one, multiple times I don't want to have. Just to give an example, I don't want to have something like this. Just to give an example, right? So what I can do, I can define something like this, local, as a local variable, and you can access these names. You can access these local names or local variable names multiple times within that module. Are you getting what I am trying to say? The local values are accessible within that module only. This is helpful. These local values will be helpful to avoid repeating the same values or expression multiple times in a configuration. There is a difference between input variables and local variables. There is a difference between input variables and local variables. First understand the local variables, then we will go to the input variables. First understand the local variables, then we will go to the input variables. So local variables assign a name to an expression or value. You can use the name multiple times within that module instead of repeating that value. You can use the name multiple times within that module instead of repeating that expression multiple times. This is helpful to avoid repeating the same values multiple times in that configuration. Something like this. Now instead of hard coding, I mean to say, instead of repeating the same value here, same tags here, same tags here, same value here, same tags here, instead of repeating like this, what I can do, I can use a local variables, but these are accessible within that module like a temporary variables, something like this. Just to, this is your own key. Guys. You can give anything. Don't think you have to give always like this. This is your own variable name, local variable name. Now here I can refer something like this, t2.micro, Instead of hard coding this one, I can say local dot whatever, like this, local dot whatever, like this. Now here also I can say, if it is a same values or expressions, you can, instead of repeating, you can use a local value variables. Clear what I am trying to say here? Instead of, if it is the same value or expression, instead of repeating multiple times, you can use as a local variables. Clear what I am trying to say? Now let me show that. So whatever is required, you can create, otherwise you can leave it. Let's say now sometime I want like this, t2 dot medium. I can say instance type medium, something, instance type medium. Now I can use this one also somewhere. Suppose here I want to create, a different instance type, right? Local dot something like this. Within the module, not within the same script. Understand, there is a difference between module and script. Within the module, this is like a module. This is a root module, right? As I already told, even a single Terraform configuration file, even though you have a single Terraform configuration file, the directory from where you are running Terraform commands is going to be what we discussed in the HCL basics only. That becomes a root module. Suppose I have defined a local variables here. Suppose I have one more module. Let's say, we will discuss later. Suppose I have a one more module like this folder, and within that I have a one more file. Now here I can't refer those values. I mean to say, here I can't refer. Something like this. I mean to say, here I can't refer. This is a different module, child module. Now my local values are part of root module. Understood? My local values are root module, but this is another module, child module. Here I can't refer. Understood what I am trying to say? We will come to this, what is this modules later, but here you can't refer. But in the root module, that can be in any other file also. No need to be in this file. It can be any other file also. Within that module you can refer, not single configuration. Clear? Let me remove this. Clear, Chandra, what you are trying to ask? Now let me create these resources. Let me create these resources. Let me create these resources. Let me create these resources using local variables. I am creating some resources. Using local variable, I am creating some resources. Instead of repeating same values or expressions multiple times in that module, you can define as a local variable and you can refer those local variable names multiple times. That is what the meaning of local variables. Clear? Now, suppose in future, suppose I want to add some additional tags. Suppose in future I want to add some additional tags. Suppose instead of modifying here, 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 if I modify here itself, is this will be used wherever they are referred in that module? Suppose in future I want to modify these tags, or in future if I want to modify something, instance type or something like this, if I modify here, wherever I am using this variable within that module, will it be reflected? Instead of updating in multiple locations, instead of updating in multiple locations, instead of updating in multiple locations, if I update here, it will reflect. Let me show that. Now these resources got created. If I go to cloud, some resources got created as per that configurations, as per that configurations, as per that configurations. Some resources got created. You can see this has a tags, the name, demo, environment, dev, and one t2.micro, one t2.medium in same availability zone only. And I got S3 bucket. I got S3 bucket. Just some resources I have created. From S3 bucket, some S3 bucket like this, some S3 bucket like this, and it will have its whatever at that tags also, whatever I have used, right? These two like this. Now let me change in one place. Let me change in one place here. Something like this I'm updating. Development. I'm not updating in multiple locations. I'm adding some other managed by, something like this. Terraform. Some tags just to update. Team, team, something like this. Team name. Let's say Mithun Tech. Just to give an example, Mithun Tech. Now I have updated only in one location, and it will be reflected when I say Terraform plan. It is going to show these many locations. It has to be these many resources has to be updated like that. It will identify, and it is going to say this will be updated in place. Earlier you have like this is going to be updated. These two will be added. These two will be added like that. These two will be added like that. And again, this also will be updated in place. This also updated in place, because I'm just playing with tags. Now let me apply Terraform apply. Terraform apply hyphen auto approve, or hyphen auto approve. You can use like this. Now if you see, these are going to be updated. Now, is everyone clear what is the use of local values? Local values assigns a name to an expression or value. So you can use these local values multiple times within that module. Instead of repeating that expression or value, you can use this multiple times. This is helpful to avoid repeating the same values or expression multiple times in a configuration. Is everyone clear what is the use of local values? It is like a temporary values you can access only within that mod. It no need to be the same configuration. If required, you can have that local values also in a separate file, something like this, locals.tf, like that, another file. Now here, these variables itself you can have in a separate file also, local values also in a separate file, but these are accessible within that. But let's say you are referring local values, but you have not defined, will it work? If you say Terraform validate also, Terraform validate or Terraform plan, whatever you do, Terraform plan, Terraform validate, whatever you are doing now, is it throwing error? Local value with this name has not been declared. This is like this variable is not been declared. This variable is not been declared. If required, you can define like this. You can define like this in the same file also. Now, if I say Terraform plan, it will use those local values. We are using those local values within that module. And if there are any changes, it will say it has to be updated, or if there is no change, it is matching like that. Now, instead of defining in a same file, you can define in another file also, different file also. Coming to your point, Chandra. So it no need to be in a same configuration. Understand there is a difference between file and a module. Now, if you see, it is in a different file. It is in a different file, but is that within the module, within the same module only? Within that module only, root module? It is in a different file, the local variables, in a different file. But am I able to refer that variables, that local variables in another file within that module? Yes. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by this? But I can't refer this one in another module, child modules, in another module, but same module it will work. Is everyone clear? The local values, how it works? That local value can be just a key and value or expression, that can be string value, that can be Boolean value, that can be something like this also you can define local values. Now, the most important values in the Terraform is input values. Input values. Input values is very, very important. These input values are used as a parameters to provide values at runtime. Local values you can't pass at runtime. You can't pass values to the local variable at runtime. Runtime in the sense when you are applying. When you are applying, you can't pass. But if I am using input values, when I am using input values, these input values or input variables are used as a parameters to provide values at runtime. What do you mean by runtime? Runtime in the sense when I am applying also I can change. When I am applying also I can change, right? We can use these input variables to pass certain values from outside of the configuration or module. We can use these input variables to pass certain values from outside of the configurations or module also. From outside of the configurations or module also you can pass at runtime. At runtime you can pass input variables. Input variables will allow you to customize. Input variables will allow you to customize the Terraform modules without altering the source code. Without altering the source code. Without altering the source code. Without altering the source code, we can customize the Terraform modules, right? Input, this input variables, will allow you to customize or let you to customize. It will let you to customize the Terraform modules without altering the source code. It will let you to customize resources or aspects or resources. It will let you to customize aspects or like resources of Terraform module. That can be a root module or child module, okay? Module without altering the source code. 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 And this will allow you to share your modules across different configurations. This allows this input variables will allow you to share your modules across different Terraform configurations, and it is going to make your module composable and reusable. You can this Terraform input variables will make to share our code, Terraform code across different different Terraform configurations, and it is going to make our Terraform configurations code reusable. This is going to make our Terraform configurations reusable. Reusable because we can pass these values at runtime, right? At runtime, these values you can pass at runtime. So it will allow you to reuse your Terraform modules, Terraform configurations without altering the source code also. Without altering the source code also. But how to define input variables? How to define input variables, right? Each input variable should be declared or must be declared using variable block. Using a variable block. Using a variable block. Using a variable block. Something like this. Variable a label. Label is like you can consider this is like a name. This is like a label. We discussed, right? The label after the variable key, like label, the label or local name we can consider label. This is considered as a variable name. This is considered as a variable name. This is considered as a variable name. And within this variable block, you need to define some values. Each input variable accepted by Terraform modules must be declared using a variable block. The label after the variable block is name for that variable. Whatever I am going to give here, right? This label we discussed, right? Label 1, label 2, like that. So this is a variable block followed by a label. This is like a name. This will be considered as a name. The label after variable block, that variable block or variable keyword is a name for the name for the variable. And again, the variable name must be unique among all variables in the same module. That variable name, this whatever name you are going to use here, right? That name should be unique among all variables in that same module. This name is used to assign a value to the variable from outside to reference the variable's value. This name is used to assign a value to the variable from outside. We can assign a value to that variable using this name. The name of the variable can be any identifier. The name of the variable can be any identifier. You can use any names, and that variable block, will have some arguments. Each variable block, you are defining can have some arguments. Each variable block which we are defining, can have some arguments, can have some arguments, can have some arguments. Something like type of the variable, type, what type of variable? There are different types of variables. Type of variable, description. You can define it, you can give a description for that variable, and you can assign a default value. You can assign a default value. Like this, it can take some arguments. There are a lot of arguments we will discuss. So there are different types of variables. There are different types. This type argument specifies what value types are accepted, what types of values are accepted for this variable. Like there are various types, right? The types like a string, number, boolean, map, list, set, like that. So there are different types. When it comes to any variable, there are different types, right? String variable, number variable, boolean variable, right? List, set, or map, like that. There are different types of variables. And the description, like you want to give some kind of a description to that variable. Description, some kind of a, what is the purpose of that variable? What is the purpose of that variable? It is like a documentation for what is the purpose of that variable. You can define the description. You can briefly describe the purpose of each variable using description argument. You can define the purpose of each variable using the description argument. And the default value, example, let me say variable. I am going to say variable. I can give anything, right? Red hat AMI. This is variable name, red hat AMI, variable name. Within this variable block, you can have a type of the variable. I can say type can be string, string variable. And a description, I can say description. This is also optional, but I can say description. I can say the AMI ID, something, the AMI ID, for the server, the AMI ID to use for the EC2 instance, like that. Some description. And optionally default value. There is something called a default. The default value. So the default value, you can say whatever. Suppose you are not passing this variable, you are not assigning the value to this variable. Wherever you are referring, it is going to use that whatever you are passing. You can say AMI ID like that. And you can use some default value. You can set some default value. If you are not passing, the default value will be used by Terraform. If you are not passing that value, that variable to the Terraform, and whatever you have given the default value, it will be used. Just to demonstrate, let me start with very simple example. Like AMI ID only. Let me take AMI ID only. Now I am going to use variables concept, input variables concept. Now to pass some values, to the Terraform from outside. I can refer something like this. I can define variable, AMI something like that. What type of variable? String, the description, the purpose of this variable, and the default value. Now this variable I can refer in my Terraform configurations. If I am not passing, if I am not assigning, or if I am not passing my own value to this variable, then the default value will be used. Let me show that. Let me show that. Let me show that. Variable input demo like that I am creating. So let me create some files, terraform.tf file, where I will pass Terraform related configurations. Terraform related configurations, right? In this terraform.tf file. Now let me create one more file here, to create some resources. Now here I am going to create some kind of a EC2 instance. Here I am going to create some kind of a EC2 instance. Now instance type, this you can use whatever local or input variables or local variables like that. For now, let me say t2.micro availability zone, let's say AP South 1A like that. Whatever tags, let me use some tags like this now. Something like this. Now whatever I have already created, let me destroy those. Whatever I have already created, let me destroy those, and I will demonstrate input variables now. I'll demonstrate input variables now. I'll demonstrate input variables now using this code. Now here I'm using AMI instance type like that, but I want to reuse this code by passing the variables at runtime, right? Sometimes I want to create a EC2 instance using different instance type, different AMI like that. Now I can use input variables now. I can use input variables now. Without modifying your Terraform configuration code, input variables will allow you to customize the aspects of Terraform module without altering the source code. You can use these input variables to pass certain values from outside of the configurations or module. Input variables are used as a parameters to provide the values at runtime to customize our Terraform deployments. So what does it mean? Let's understand now. Now sometimes I may want to create a different EC2 instance using different AMI, different instance type, in a different availability zone like that. If I am hard coding like this, I need to modify this. Do I need to alter this source code? Do I need to alter this source code if I am modifying, if I am hard coding like this? Sometimes I want to create an instance with a different AMI, different instance type. Do I need to alter the source code if I am hard coding like this? Yes, no. If I am hard coding like this, do I need to alter my Terraform source code to create some resources with the different values? Definitely yes. But I can do this, I can avoid this, I can reuse this Terraform code, Terraform configurations by using a variables. So how I can using variable block, using variable block, variable, you can give anything, AMI ID, this is your variable name, and each variable block will have some arguments, variable block arguments, type of the argument, that can be string based on your requirement, that can be number, that can be number. Type I am saying string. And description, the description, whatever as per your requirement. The AMI ID to create a server, something like this. The AMI ID to be used, the AMI ID to be used for EC2 instance, some description, and the default, you can set some value, the default, whatever, up to you, whatever value. So since this is a string, right, this is a string, I'm creating a type of string like this. Now here what I can say, instead of hard coding like this, I can refer a variable. I can define like this, and I can refer a variable. So that variable, how I can refer that variable, using var. There is a var. You need to use here something like this, var dot that variable name, var dot that variable name. You can use sometimes like this also, sometimes like this also. In older versions we used to have something like this. Now you no need to use something like this. In older versions we used to have something like this. You can directly refer var dot that variable name. If even though you are not passing the, or you are not assigning the value to this variable, since we have defined the default value, here the default value will be used. Is everyone clear what we mean by this default? You are defining a variable, you are declaring a variable, and you are saying the type of the variable is string. This is the default value for that variable, this is the description for that variable, this is the variable name. Even though you are not assigning the value to this variable, or you are not assigning, or you are not passing at runtime, this will be used as a default value wherever you are referring. You can refer the variable using this var dot that variable name. This is like you are defining the variable, and here you are referencing the variable. Clear what I am trying to say here? Now like this you can define multiple variables. Now suppose here, sometimes I may want to create one instance, sometimes I may want to create 3 instances, sometimes I may want to create 4 instances. Instead of modifying or altering this code, can I refer this also as a variable? Can I define this as a variable and refer that as a variable here, so that I can pass this variable at runtime also? Yes, like this, variable easy to count something. This can be anything, easy to count type. But now if I say type as a string, type as string value, like this, and if I refer something here, do you think it will work? Will it work? No. So here this has to be what type? This has to be what type? The type should be number. The type is number. I will say value as 2, like that. Now here, because there is a variable, the default value is 2. Now I can give some description. This is not mandatory. Number of EC2 instances to be created, or number of EC2 instances, or count of EC2, like that you can give. Now I can refer like this. And this instance type also you can refer as a variable. For now, let's understand. I am not passing at runtime, but even though I am not passing, let me use this. Let me go to this one. Let me go to this folder wherever I have this Terraform code. Let me go to this. Let me go to this folder. This is where I have a Terraform code. This is where I have a Terraform code. Let me open that in the command prompt so that you can understand easily. Now this is where I have a Terraform code. In the terraform.tf file, I have defined the Terraform configurations. The Terraform configurations. In this file, I have defined some variables, some resources like this. Now here I am referring the variables, and here I am declaring the variables. And again, without declaring, can you refer again basics of any programmatic language? Without declaring those variables, can you refer these variables like this? No, it will give some error. It will give some error, right? If you see, let me run the Terraform. First, let me initialize. While initializing also, it may throw error. Let me initialize. Let's wait for this Terraform init to be completed. Then we will apply and we will see how it works. Now let me show Terraform validate. It will throw error if you don't pass, or if you while applying also, if you don't pass, it will throw some kind of error because you are referring the variable and you are not defining like that. So reference to undeclared input variable like this, because we are referencing but there is no declaration. You need to declare, and you can set some default values like this. Now even though you are not passing, let's say Terraform validate, this time it will not throw any error. This time it will not throw any error. And let me show Terraform plan. Even though I am not passing, even though I am not assigning or I am not passing any value, even though I'm not assigning or not passing any value, is it using those default values? If you see that AMI, I have referred some variable here. Is it using some default, whatever the default value I have assigned for that variable? If you see here, I am just planned. I have not applied. Do you see that AMI is the default value? The instance type also, the instance type I have not hard coded. That is fine. Count. Since I have given count as 2, it is saying 2 resources to be created. Now, without assigning also, if you are trying to apply, it will use the default value. It is going to use the default value. Now let me show I'm trying to apply. The resources are getting created as per that variables with default values. Is everyone clear? What is the use of this default? What is the use of this default for these variables? First, before I explain how to assign or pass the values, your own values, before I explain, is everyone clear what is the use of this default? Guys, is everyone clear? What is the use of this default? Now, let's say I want to create or I want to update also. Let me test try whatever has been created, but my requirement is different. My requirement I want to create using different AMIID, different number of instances. Let me destroy whatever has been created using the default value. If required, I can pass the values. There are multiple ways to pass the values to the variables. There are multiple ways you can pass values to the variables using -var, the CLI, the CLI. So at the when I am executing Terraform plan or Terraform apply like that, I can pass values using CLI. You can assign values. I mean to say assigning. When variables are declared in your Terraform configurations, and they can set in number of ways. We can assign the values to those variables number of ways. One is using -var command line option, or you can define your variable values in a tf. There is a one more file called .tfvars file, or command line argument, or as an environment variable also you can set. Let me explain today only that -var option. Let me explain that -var option. So to specify individual variables on the command line, use -var option when you are running the Terraform plan or Terraform apply. Let's say I can use this option when I am running Terraform plan or Terraform apply also. I can say Terraform plan -var the variable name, the variable name, the variable name -var. Here the variable name, what I can say, the variable name what I can say, whatever I have defined, let's say I am defining the variable name AMIID. I am defining the variable name AMIID, and value can be anything. Let's say now I want to create a AWS EC2 instance using Ubuntu AMI. Let's say using Ubuntu AMI. Can I use that AMI ID? Now, let's say I want to create a AWS instance using Ubuntu AMI instead of Red Hat AMI. So instead of Red Hat AMI, if I want to use Ubuntu AMI, I can pass this AMI ID like this. AMI ID, the variable name, the AMI ID, the variable name, and value, the value, something like this. And one more, -var equals to count. Count is one variable and one. Now if I am giving like this, how many, same Terraform code only, let me plan. I am just executing a plan. I am not hard coding. Or not, the variable name is not count. One second. EC2 count. The variable name is EC2 count, not just count. EC2 count. EC2 count. One second. It is not a count. It is EC2 count. EC2 count like this. Now same Terraform code only. Now if I am saying something like this, if you see, this is just a plan. This is just a plan. Now one resource to be added, only one resource is to be added, because I am passing count, that EC2 count as one. I am assigning a value. I am assigning a value to that variable one using this AMI ID. So only one resource will be created using this AMI. Now if I say Terraform apply with this same option, Terraform apply with this same option, if you see, is it creating the resources as per that variables what I am assigning or passing to my Terraform configurations? If you see now, if I go to my AWS, can I see one EC2 instance created with that Red Hat AMI, whatever AMI ID I am passing now? If you see, let me refresh. Let me refresh. Now this is still getting created. This is still getting created. Now one resource is created. Let me refresh here. Let me refresh here. Now this one, the tags EC2 instance is getting created. Only one instance is getting created. Is it created using that AMI? Whatever I passed at runtime. This one instance like that. Yes. Now, suppose you want to reuse this same Terraform configuration. You want to reuse this same Terraform configuration. When you are applying, can you say whether you need 2 servers, 4 servers, and whatever AMI ID you want to use for that like that? Are you guys able to understand what I am trying to say? You can use these input variables. You can use these input variables to provide a values to your Terraform configurations at runtime. Input variables will let you to customize the aspects of Terraform module without altering the source code. Did I modified my source code, the Terraform configuration code, to create a different types of resources now? No. I mean to say different values. I am using a input variable concept. We can use these input variables to pass certain values from outside of the Terraform configuration. There are various ways, sir. There are various ways. I explained just command line. There are multiple ways. From here, I'll continue tomorrow. From here, I'll continue tomorrow. Okay. So there are other ways also. And again, I have explained only two types of variables. I have explained only two types of variables like string variables, number variables. There are a lot of other types of variables like, as I already told, Boolean variables, list, set, map, objects, list of objects, set of objects, map of objects like that. In detail, in next 3-4 sessions, we are going to discuss about variables only. Very, very important concept, input variables. Next 3-4 sessions, we will be discussing about variables only. String, number, Boolean, list, set, map, and there are multiple ways to pass or assign the values to that variables. Today, I have just explained only CLI option. There are other ways also. We'll discuss all those things from tomorrow. Okay. Any questions, any queries before I start the session? Once your practice is done, you destroy your Terraform resources, whatever you have created. Okay. If you don't have any question, I'll continue from here tomorrow, guys. Thank you. That's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow.